The true story is I'm not putting no target on my forehead, and I'm not coming out on TV and saying anything bad about Suge Knight.
I remember the time, actually, it's funny because he showed up in the club video shoot. He came, it was like, Suge's outside! Suge's outside! Everybody like, Suge!
And there's Suge Knight and Cat Williams shaking down the CEO of Studio 71. Talk about where's my money?
Marrying Suge Knight made the music industry tremble in its timberlands. Suge wasn't just a record executive, he was a force of nature, a real-life rap game Godzilla. Back in the 90s, Suge didn't play by the rules. He rewrote them with a pen dipped in audacity. Rumor has it that he didn't just sign artists, he signed contracts with a side of intimidation. If you crossed him, well, let's just say you'd be seeing stars. But his tactics worked. His label became the Motown of gangster rap, churning out hits and creating stars. Suge didn't just make waves, he was a tsunami that washed over the music scene. In this video, we will look at why everyone was terrified of him. Assault on Linwood and George Stanley. In the early days of Death Row Records, when the label was just beginning to make its mark on the music industry, Dr. Dre invited two aspiring rappers, Linwood and George Stanley, to the studio for a recording session. It was a dream come true for the young artists, who saw this as their big break. They did not know that their encounter with Suge Knight would turn into a nightmare they would never forget. During their time at the studio, Linwood needed to make a phone call and innocently picked up the nearest phone. Unknown to him, that particular phone was reserved for calls from Harry O, a notorious drug kingpin and the main financier of Death Row. As fate would have it, Suge Knight happened to be present at the studio that day. Suge noticed Linwood on the phone and approached him, giving him a chance to walk away peacefully. He warned Linwood, saying, "Say, blood, don't be on that phone." However, Linwood, unaware of Suge's reputation and not being from Los Angeles, responded defiantly, "Don't be coming at me with all that gangbanging shit. I'm not from LA." Suge's embarrassment quickly turned to rage. Without hesitation, he pulled out a gun. Linwood and George, now realizing the gravity of the situation, were filled with fear. Suge forced them to strip down to their underwear, stripping them of their dignity and power. Suge proved he was in control and disobedience would not be tolerated. With sadistic pleasure, he proceeded to unleash a brutal assault on the Stanley brothers, beating them mercilessly until they were left battered and bloodied. But Suge's reign of terror didn't end there. To ensure that Linwood and George would never dare to seek justice, he took their IDs, a reminder that he could easily track them down if they dared to involve the authorities. It was a calculated move designed to keep them silent and submissive. However, the Stanley brothers refused to be silenced. As soon as they were released from the Death Row studios, battered and bruised, they mustered the courage to contact the police and seek justice for the horrific assault they had endured. They were determined to hold Suge Knight accountable for his actions. But Suge, always the manipulator, had a cunning plan to evade justice. When Linwood and George filed a lawsuit against him, he resorted to his usual tactics of intimidation and manipulation. In a shocking turn of events, he offered the prosecuting attorney's daughter a record deal, effectively buying off their own defense. The promise of a recording contract was enough to sway the prosecutor, Larry Longo, who was subsequently fired from the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office. Gina Longo, the only white recording artist on Death Row at the time, became a pawn in Suge's game. The outcome of the lawsuit was a mere slap on the wrist for Suge Knight, leaving Linwood and George Stanley to grapple with the trauma and injustice they had experienced. Devontae Swing. This is a particularly disturbing incident that has been shrouded in rumors and speculation, but many in the hip-hop community believe Suge Knight's fingerprints all over it. In 1993, Jodeci, one of the biggest R&B groups at the time, found themselves involved with Suge. Jodeci had achieved great success under the guidance of a young Sean Puffy Combs, releasing their acclaimed album Forever My Lady on Uptown Records. However, their relationship with Suge Knight and Death Row Records began to complicate matters. As the bad boys of R&B, Jodeci flirted with the idea of leaving Uptown for Death Row, drawn to the allure of Suge's power and influence. This decision would prove to have dire consequences. Suge, always one to resort to violence or threats, either assaulted or threatened to assault Andre Harrell, the founder of Uptown and mentor to Puffy, who had released Jodeci as their manager. This move allowed Suge to fill that managerial role. However, despite their flirtation with Death Row, Jodeci ultimately remained on Uptown Records. This decision did not sit well with the company, which harbored resentment towards Suge and Death Row. As a form of retaliation, Uptown refused to promote Jodeci's second album, Diary of a Mad Band. But then, something truly horrifying occurred. In July of 1993, Devontae Swing, a member of Jodeci who handled much of the music production, became the victim of a brutal home invasion. He was subjected to a savage assault that nearly took his life. Tied up and beaten relentlessly, Devontae's skull was split open during the vicious attack. In a desperate struggle for survival, he managed to bite off one of the assailant's fingers. The attackers made off with approximately $20,000 worth of jewelry and other valuables. The aftermath of the assault took a toll on his mental health, leading to substance abuse problems and writer's block. Jodeci's once promising career began to unravel, and Devontae's attempts to start his own label were marred by his abusive behavior towards his artists, causing them to abandon ship. The question that lingers is whether Suge Knight himself orchestrated this brutal attack. Speculation suggests that Devontae may have refused to continue producing songs for Death Row, feeling that he wasn't being fairly compensated, a common complaint within Death Row Records at the time. While the members of Jodeci have been vague about their suspicions regarding the perpetrator, rumors have circulated since the night of the attack. One particularly disturbing version suggests that Suge's booty goons sexually assaulted Devontae in front of his own family members. The truth may never be fully revealed, but the hip-hop community continues to speculate on Suge Knight's potential involvement in this heinous act. As a result of the attack, Jodeci's attempts at reunions have been hindered by Devontae's embarrassing public displays, preventing a full-scale comeback from materializing. Spitting in Liar Cohen's face, Suge Knight's volatile and confrontational nature extended beyond the confines of Death Row Records. One of the most shocking stories involving Suge Knight revolves around an incident during a prison visit where he allegedly spat in the face of Liar Cohen, the co-president of Def Jam Records, over a deal involving Snoop Dogg. At the time, Suge Knight was incarcerated and was serving his sentence. Liar Cohen visited Suge in prison to negotiate an agreement for Snoop Dogg. However, the negotiation took an unexpected turn when Suge deemed Cohen's asking price too high. Former Death Row Records executive Reggie Wright Jr. shared this disturbing story during an episode of the Boss Talk 101 podcast in 2023. According to Wright Jr., Suge rejected Cohen's offer of $7 million and, in a fit of anger, spat in his face. This shocking act of disrespect occurred within the confines of San Luis Obispo prison, leaving Cohen humiliated and stunned. The incident highlights the deep-seated animosity that Suge Knight harbored towards East Coast labels and executives. Suge's disdain for the East Coast music scene was well known, and this encounter with Liar Cohen became a manifestation of that animosity. Wright Jr. recounted the events, saying, "He comes and offers Suge $7 million. Tell Lear the most that I can get for Snoop is $7 million. Suge never really liked the East Coasters or labels or whatever. Happy Walters was a victim." In the early to mid-90s, Happy David Walters was a prominent figure in the hip-hop industry, managing artists such as Cypress Hill, House of Pain, and RZA. He co-owned Immortal Records and even released the highly acclaimed movie soundtrack for Judgment Night. However, his success and influence soon caught the attention of Suge Knight. One day, while in Los Angeles, Happy Walters found himself at an ATM, minding his own business. Suddenly, he vanished without a trace, leaving his loved ones and colleagues in a state of panic. A missing persons report was filed, and the search for Happy Walters began. 2 days later, Walters reappeared in Long Beach, but he was far from unscathed. Covered in bruises and bearing cigar burns, he appeared dizzy and disoriented. Walters claimed to have no recollection of where he had been during those 2 days, leaving everyone to wonder what had transpired. However, suspicions quickly turned towards Suge Knight. It was widely known that Suge had his sights set on Walters' client, RZA, for his upcoming Death Row extension, Death Row East. Adding fuel to the fire, Walters had openly mocked Suge on the Judgment Day soundtrack, making him a prime target for Suge's wrath. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit together, pointing towards Suge's involvement in Walters' disappearance and subsequent injuries. Faced with mounting pressure and the fear of further harm, Walters made a pivotal decision. He released the RZA from his contract, severing ties with Death Row and Suge Knight. It was a move to protect and distance himself. Following the incident, Walters gradually withdrew from the hip-hop scene, no longer working with prominent acts in the industry. However, he found success in other areas of the entertainment industry, particularly as the owner of Catalyst Sports and Media. While Suge Knight's direct involvement in the assault may never be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the circumstances surrounding Walters' disappearance and injuries strongly suggest his connection to the incident. The Vanilla Ice incident. One time, Mario Chocolate Johnson, who Knight managed at the time, made a shocking claim that he had helped Vanilla Ice write his hit song, Ice Ice Baby, without receiving any credit or royalties. Enraged by this perceived injustice, Suge Knight decided to confront Vanilla Ice directly. He paid a visit to the hotel where Vanilla Ice was staying, ready to settle the matter once and for all. The details of what transpired during this encounter have been the subject of much speculation and differing accounts. According to the most elaborate version of the story, Knight took Vanilla Ice out onto the balcony and dangled him by his ankles, threatening to drop him unless he signed over the royalties to the smash hit. However, it's important to note that Vanilla Ice has repeatedly disputed this rumor, claiming that it did not happen as described. In the 2001 documentary, Welcome to Death Row, Vanilla Ice shed some light on the incident, offering his own perspective. He stated, "Suge took me out on the balcony. He had me look over the edge, showing me how high I was up there. I needed to wear a diaper that day."
I needed to wear a diaper on that day.
While the exact details may remain muddled, the outcome remained the same. Suge Knight managed to convince Vanilla Ice to hand over 25% of the rights to the record. Building a successful record label requires substantial capital, and Suge Knight knew this all too well. While the money from Vanilla Ice's hit song Ice Ice Baby provided a solid foundation for Death Row Records, Knight sought additional investment to take the label to new heights. This is where Michael Harris, also known as Harry O, enters the picture. Harris was a notorious drug lord serving a 28-year sentence behind bars when Knight reached out to him for a much-needed infusion of funds. Harris's wife, Lydia, took charge of the business side of things, and together, they made a bold move. Allegedly, a staggering sum of $1.5 million was invested into Death Row Records, propelling it to become a money-making machine. With the infusion of capital, Death Row Records went on to generate profits exceeding $325 million during a 4-year period. The label became a powerhouse in the music industry, releasing groundbreaking albums from artists like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac Shakur. However, the success of Death Row Records would ultimately be marred by its questionable origins. A business founded on alleged drug money was destined for disaster. Lydia Harris, the wife of Michael Harris, proved to be the final nail in the coffin. She sued Death Row Records for a staggering $107 million, claiming that the label was built with illicit funds. The lawsuit forced Death Row Records into bankruptcy, marking a significant downfall for Suge Knight's empire. Mark Anthony Bell. In 1995, Suge Knight's violent tendencies reached a new level when he targeted Mark Anthony Bell, a record promoter and friend of Puff Daddy from Bad Boy Records. Unaware of the animosity between Death Row and Bad Boy, Bell made the ill-fated decision to attend the Death Row Christmas party. This decision would lead to a horrifying encounter with Suge Knight and a group of their associates. Suge approached Bell, demanding Puff Daddy's home address, a request that Bell understandably refused. What followed was a brutal assault that would leave Bell scarred both physically and emotionally. Together with his associates, Suge Knight subjected him to a terrifying ordeal, beating him with champagne bottles and even forcing him to drink urine. All of this is because Bell refused to put his friend's life in danger. Desperate to escape the torment, Bell attempted to jump from the balcony of the house, but he was dragged back before he could make his escape. Despite enduring unimaginable abuse, Bell managed to keep Puff Daddy's address a secret. Eventually, he was allowed to leave, but the trauma of that night would haunt him forever. In the aftermath of the assault, Mark Anthony Bell faced a difficult decision. Should he risk his life by contacting the police or remain silent? After a few days of contemplation, he made the courageous choice to seek justice. Bell reported the incident to the authorities despite the potential danger it posed. Suge Knight, true to his nature, denied any involvement in the assault, claiming, "I don't piss in champagne glasses."
He later on, Suge said that we was trying to get the address on where Poppy mama live at and so on. He said he got the shit beat out of him, right? And he said he drunk about 35 champagne-sized piss. Now, in the lawsuit, he said that all the Death Row guys, made him drink all the piss, choked him out. One guy was hanging him over the balcony, beat the shit out of him,
However, the truth eventually came to light, and Knight settled with Bell for a reported sum of $600,000.
He sued everybody, Death Row and everybody, those individuals, but me. So, I paid the debt.
It was a small price to pay for the physical and emotional scars that Bell would carry with him for the rest of his life. It wasn't until years later, in the Showtime series American Dream, American Nightmare, that Suge Knight finally admitted to the horrific act of forcing people to drink urine. Speaking about Mark Anthony Bell, Knight callously remarked, "He probably drank 20 shots of piss." Such a shocking revelation only added to the already disturbing legacy of Suge Knight's violent assaults. Sam Snead. In 1996, Sam Snead, a producer and rapper associated with Death Row Records, fell victim to the violent tendencies of Suge Knight and his entourage. Sam had worked closely with Dr. Dre in the studio and even made appearances on Snoop Doggy Dogg's debut album. However, tensions arose when Dr. Dre decided to leave Death Row and start his own label. Unhappy with Dre's departure, Suge Knight saw an opportunity to assert his dominance and encouraged his roster of artists to turn against Dre. One night, at Suge's favorite restaurant, Monty's Steakhouse, Sam found himself in a precarious situation. Suge put him on the spot, demanding that he pledge his disloyalty to Dr. Dre's Sam was already on thin ice with Suge, as he believed Sam had featured too many guest appearances by East Coast rappers in his music video for Lady Heroin. When Sam refused to comply with Suge's demand and labeled Dr. Dre as a homosexual, an idea Knight wanted his artist to endorse, the situation took a violent turn. Suge ordered his associates to assault Sam right there in the restaurant. The assault was not only physically brutal, but also psychologically humiliating. They battered Sam Snead, leaving him bloody and bruised, and then forced him to join them at the table without even allowing him to clean up. As a twisted example for other attendees, Sam had to sit there, disheveled and injured, and eat his dinner. The experience was so traumatizing that Sam Snead never returned to the Death Row offices. Despite the potential success of his never-released debut album, he chose to distance himself from the toxic and violent environment that Suge Knight had created. In an interview years later, Sam expressed relief at never having to see those people again, emphasizing that it was a good thing. Fortunately, Sam Snead was able to continue his career as a hip-hop producer, showcasing his talent and resilience. He refused to let the assault define him and focused on creating music in a more positive and supportive environment. Napoleon Story. One individual who dared to defy Suge Knight was Outlaw's member, Napoleon. The incident took place during Tupac's Saturday Night Live performance in New York. Tensions were running high, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. It was during this time that Napoleon found himself at odds with Suge Knight, a confrontation that could have turned violent. According to Napoleon, the conflict began when Suge took one of his friends into a room, accusing him of disrespecting him in some way. Fueled by a sense of loyalty and a desire to protect his friend, Napoleon decided to intervene. He entered the room and pushed Suge's hand away as he pointed at his friend. This act of defiance did not sit well with Tupac. Tupac expected Napoleon to fall in line and side with Suge as he asked him to bomb on his friend. However, Napoleon refused to comply, fully aware of the violent extent to which Suge Knight could have gone. The situation could have escalated further, potentially leading to dire consequences for Napoleon and his friend. Outside the room, Napoleon's friend's uncle, known as the Reaper, was pacing anxiously, ready to intervene if necessary. It was a tense moment, with the potential for violence hanging in the air. Thankfully, Napoleon's quick thinking and refusal to back down diffused the situation before it spiraled out of control. Women are not exempted. In 2008, Suge Knight's violent tendencies extended to attacking women, as evidenced by his assault on Melissa Isaac, his girlfriend at the time. Despite the downfall of Death Row Records following Tupac's murder, Suge's 8-year incarceration, and the departure of every artist, Knight's propensity for violence remained unchanged. One fateful night, as the couple was en route to a strip club, another woman called Suge's cell phone. Melissa, curious about the call, confronted him, unknowingly setting off a chain of events that would lead to a brutal assault. In a fit of rage, Suge unleashed his fury on Melissa, beating her relentlessly. The assault escalated when Melissa, in an attempt to escape, dragged the steering wheel, causing a collision with the curb. Desperate to flee, she tried to run, but Suge, with his immense size and strength, caught up to her. He continued to beat her, kicking her head in a shocking display of violence. Witnesses were horrified as they watched Suge Knight unleash his wrath upon Melissa Isaac. The aftermath of the assault left her unconscious and battered. Suge, displaying a complete lack of remorse, stripped her naked and callously left her there. Later that night, the police apprehended Suge Knight, charging him not only for the assault, but also for possession of narcotics. The situation took a terrifying turn when Melissa Isaac went missing on the day she was scheduled to testify against Knight. Speculations arose that Suge had orchestrated her disappearance to avoid facing the consequences of his actions. However, she eventually resurfaced, and it was revealed that he had convinced her to skip the court date. The court's leniency towards Suge Knight's numerous crimes in the 2000s fueled speculation that he may have been a police informant. This theory added another layer of intrigue to the already shocking and controversial life of Suge Knight. It raised questions about the extent of his connections and the potential protection he received from law enforcement, sending goons after Eminem, Dr. Dre, and Snoop Dogg. The feud between Snoop Dogg and Suge Knight had been brewing ever since Snoop's departure from Death Row Records to sign with No Limit. The tension between the two was evident, and it was about to reach its boiling point. When Snoop, Dr. Dre, and Eminem prepared for a show in Hawaii, Suge plotted against them. According to Big Nas, Eminem's former bodyguard, in an interview with Cam Capone News in 2019, Suge Knight sent around 50 goons all the way from Los Angeles to disrupt the event. As the plane touched down in Hawaii, the performers and their entourage were greeted not by the warm embrace of the island, but by 20 Honolulu police officers. It was a clear indication that Death Row was there, and they were not there to spread peace and harmony. The tension in the air was thick, and the performers knew they had to be on high alert. Big Nas recalled the scariest moment of the entire ordeal, saying, "When the plane landed, we were greeted by 20 Honolulu police officers, and they told us that Death Row is here." Suge Knight's determination to disrupt the show was evident in the sheer number of goons he had sent. The performers and their entourage quickly realized that vacation mode was over. They had to shift gears and prepare for the worst. Bulletproof vests were donned, and the wives and girlfriends of the performers stood by their sides, ready to face whatever may come their way. To ensure the safety of everyone involved, Interscope Records had to foot the bill for additional security. Honolulu, police officers were assigned to each bodyguard, a necessary measure due to the depth of Suge Knight's influence and the potential for violence that loomed over the event. The tension continued to mount as the goons who had been sent by Suge Knight found themselves on the same plane back to Los Angeles as Eminem and his team. It was a tense situation, with the potential for violence hanging in the air. However, the confrontation on the plane did not escalate into physical violence. Eminem took the opportunity to make it clear to one of the goons that he had no intention of working with Suge Knight. It was a bold move, considering the circumstances. Fortunately, the incident in Hawaii did not result in violence. He cried due to Ja Rule's similarities to Tupac. Despite Suge Knight's notorious reputation for violence and intimidation, a surprising moment revealed a softer side to the infamous CEO. The story revolves around Suge Knight's emotional reaction upon meeting Ja Rule, as he is reminded of the late Tupac Shakur. The revelation of this story came from Irv Gotti, who initially shared it on Vlad TV.
And I'll never forget, he asked Ja, what's your 5-year goal? And Ja, in true fashion, smoking the blunt, he said, "Sky's the limit, my nigga, sky's the limit." And Suge actually broke down.
Really?
He said, "My man said the same thing." He said, "You remind me of my man," and broke down.
Tupac.
And he, real tears.
Ja Rule later corroborated the account, adding further credibility to the emotional encounter. According to Ja Rule, when he first met Suge Knight, the powerful CEO cried because he saw qualities in Ja Rule that reminded him of Tupac. Ja Rule recounted the emotional moment, saying,
"It was an emotional moment for Suge because I think he's seen qualities in me that I guess he's seen in Pac.
Right.
And then actually meeting me,
Yeah.
we had, I guess, similar energy to him. Because he asked me a question, and when I answered, he said, "Yo, that's exactly what Pac said."
Which this is.
And he got real emotional.
So this
about
is
shit.
real. This is true.
Real. This is real shit. As a matter of fact, we was out here in LA in Enterprise Studio.
The encounter between Suge Knight and Ja Rule showcased a side of Suge that was rarely seen. Despite his reputation for violence and aggression, Suge had a deep admiration for and connection with Tupac. The similarities he saw in Ja Rule, both in terms of energy and qualities, struck a chord within him. Ja Rule's presence evoked a strong emotional response from Suge Knight, as he was reminded of the late Tupac Shakur. It humanizes Suge and reveals a more complex side of his character. It demonstrated that beneath the tough exterior, there was a man who held a deep affection for Tupac and saw glimpses of him in others. While Suge Knight's actions and reputation may overshadow his moments of vulnerability, it is important to acknowledge the complexity of his character. As Ja Rule mentioned, Suge could be ruthless, but he was also capable of showing kindness and affection to those who treated him well. If you enjoyed this video, click on the card showing on your screen right now for more videos.